Welcome to this presentation on project management for the Operations Departmental Manager. So we're going to be looking today at knowledge and skills for project management, which is about planning, managing, and looking at risk for projects. Fits into the 10 units of the Operations Departmental Manager. And if you look at the delivery mechanism, it's getting towards the end of the course where we can use all those skills we've learned about leading people, managing people, communication, building relationships, pulling together into a project which may involve problem solving, it may involve managing change, and it may involve finance aspects. Part of the endpoint assessment, project management is one of the assessment methods for a project proposal and presentation following Gateway. So it's an important part of this particular standard, where once you go through Gateway, you have 12 weeks by which to develop a project, implement a project, and then report on the project with a 20-minute presentation followed by question and answer. So it forms one of the two assessment methods for this particular standard. First thing to think about then is what is the difference between projects and business as usual? So business as usual are those day-to-day activities involved in delivering the departmental or organizational objectives set out in the company vision and mission. Compare that to a project, which is a discrete activity that is additional to business as usual. It may be a way of testing new ideas or innovations to see if they can be incorporated into your normal operations. It has a start, middle, and end, and not all projects are successful. It may be that as a consequence of a project, you decide not to adopt the new approach, as it does not bring in the benefits you'd hoped it would. So in that sense, it's part of an investigation to see if it can be brought into business as usual. Let's have a look at why you might bring into a project. Well, here's some examples for you to think about. You might need a project because of new ways of working. That might be brought about due to technology or demand for new products and services. It might be as a response to external drivers, such as the PESTLE that we saw when we looked at strategy. PESTLE meaning those influences which are related to political, economical, social, technological, legal, and environmental. It may be that you decide to run a project as a consequence of competition from others within your sector, or it may be due to takeovers, mergers, restructuring that might be as a consequence of changes to improve the financial efficiency. So looking at this list, can you identify a project that you have in mind or that you've delivered? And in terms of your endpoint assessment, the project proposal may be based on one of the following three items: a need to review and implement a change plan to improve efficiency. The second one is a continuous improvement review of a current process, service, or product to ensure it is still fit for purpose and meets the current needs of the business. Or the third need is a need to implement a direct saving, either due to costs or headcount across the team, department, or organization following a forecast activity. So if you can identify a project that you can do as a consequence of some of these particular changes. Once you have, you would then put that project into the 5 stages of the project life cycle. First stage is a concept, the idea of what you're trying to solve or achieve as a consequence of doing this project. Once you've got an idea and you've brainstormed it or used some problem-solving techniques like root cause analysis, you then start to hone it into a clear definition of an intended plan. This becomes the blueprint for your project, the project management plan. And that will be used to measure against the progress of the project and the success of that particular project. Using that particular plan, you can then identify your operations by which you're going to deliver the project management plan. All those activities which involve leadership skills, building a team, setting objectives, monitoring and review of objectives against the performance of that particular plan. And as you go through the project management life cycle, there'll be different stages that you sign off towards the end of the project when you start to think about closure. And that's starting to review the project, looking at the successes, closing off some of the activities, and it might involve staffing, which you sort of close off, as well as operations. And then evaluating the success of that project in terms of, did it achieve what you wanted it to achieve? Did you realize the benefits which you originally set out as part of your idea and concept? So within each of these particular stages, these 5 stages, concept, definition, implementation, closure, and benefits, there are a series of documents that you can use to ensure the effective monitoring and development of your project. And we're going to look at some of these in more detail, so I won't go through them all, but we'll move on to them as we go through this presentation. First, having a concept is about trying to identify what is it you're trying to achieve, what is the vision as part of this particular project. What's the idea? What are you expecting the outcome, the benefits? Can you do a cost benefits analysis to identify, if you make these changes, what improvements will it make to the efficiency of running your particular department? What are the success and what are the stages within this particular project? And what resources will you need? So once you've identified the vision, what you're trying to achieve, the concept, it's important to think about who's going to be involved in this project. And there are a range of different roles and responsibilities within a project. The first one is the project sponsor. This is the senior member of staff who reports to the senior management team about the progress of the particular project. They're the ones who've been heavily involved in developing the idea. They may not be running the project on a day-to-day basis, but they need to be kept in touch with how it's going. They will help to develop the project management plan in conjunction with the project manager. And the project manager is the person responsible for the day-to-day delivery and operations of the project. So this would be like yourself in terms of running that particular project, responsible for the resources, the staffing, the monitoring of the progress of the project against the project management plan. It might be within the project you have access to a coordinator or project team or an administrator. It really depends on the size and scale of the particular project as to how many people are involved. In larger organizations, which are very much project driven, you might even have a project office where people are constantly working towards particular projects. And that would be part of the definition. And the role of the project manager, the project sponsor, is to ensure project governance, which is the definition of the roles and responsibilities, what systems and procedures are going to be followed throughout the project. And bear in mind, an organization might have several projects involved. So you might be one project manager, but there might be a whole program of projects, and you might have a program manager for particular projects, all following similar sort of systems, procedures, processes for delivering of projects, all the way down to the auditing internally and externally to ensure compliance. So your project management plan, in terms of the definition, this is the blueprint by which the project sponsor and the project manager put it all together as to how the project will run. In that, it includes things like the different timings of activities, what resources are going to be used, how communication is going to take place during the project, how it's going to be reported, reviewed, and evaluated. And typical contents of a project management plan: identifying the outcomes and benefits, who are the key roles and responsibilities, and I'll come to a Raki matrix in a minute. What's the scope of the project? What's involved? What isn't involved in this particular project? So everybody knows whereabouts it's going to go to, and what's the barriers or what's involved in this particular project. Could be broken down into different work packages or phases as you go through the project. It will have a series of time schedules and markers by which milestones can be assessed and judged against. It may even have a budget to which you're working towards, and how you're going to communicate to all the different stakeholders within that particular project. It will have an opportunity to identify what are the potential risks that will take place in the project, so that you can try and anticipate them and try and reduce that risk or mitigate it, and also a way of recording any issues that happen throughout the project that then affect the timescales or the resources within that initial project management plan, and how you're going to report it and evaluate it and ensure administrative compliance of everything that is taking place. So we're going to look at some project management tools now to help you develop your project management plan and implement your project. And here's some of those particular key project management tools that are used within the project management life cycle. First of all, let's just consider, take a moment, perhaps even put this presentation on pause. You're going to build an extension for your house. Think about those 5 different stages within the project management cycle. What would you do in each of those different phases, stages, to ensure the successful implementation of this particular project? Perhaps put the presentation on pause, write down a few things that you'd put within that if you wanted to build an extension. Okay, let's have a look. So here's the 5 different phases: concept, planning, implementation, closure, and benefits. Within those, you can break down what's going to take place into different stages. You could then, against that work breakdown structure, you can then allocate times or responsibilities, and you can then move that into a chart to show how you would implement it. The first project management tool that you might want to use is this work breakdown structure. Break your project down into its component parts, and then start to think about how you can put that all back together against the timescales. One way is the Raki matrix. This is a way of looking at Who is going to be responsible for the different stages within the tasks? Who's going to be accountable for making decisions? Who's going to need consulting? So if you think about the extension, you might want to consult with friends and family at the beginning just to see what you want in terms of the design and concept. You might want to consult with an architect who might be accountable for putting together some plans for your extension. And then you might need to consult with the planning office in the local authority to see if what you can do, what you can't do, is it acceptable, what you're hoping to achieve. You might want to inform some of your neighbours or the local area to say, this is what I'm going to be doing. Does anybody have any objections to it? So you put together this thing called a RACI matrix, where you can identify who's involved, who are the stakeholders within this particular project. During the different stages, who's going to be responsible, accountable, consulted and informed. And that will help to direct and decide your communication plan. Once you've got all this together, you can put it into a Gantt chart. So think about your work breakdown structure, put it into its component parts, identify the timescales, maybe identify who is involved as well in terms of perhaps color coding, or you can see here we've got some milestones and some points by which we're going to review and evaluate the progress of this particular project. Okay, so that would be a Gantt chart. And within a communication, you would put down who the stakeholders are, how often you're going to communicate with them, how you're going to communicate them, and what is the purpose of that communication. So you've got a nice communication strategy here based on a RACI matrix, and also thinking about the frequency and timing of communications, which can also go into your Gantt chart to show when specific meetings are going to take place. If you've got a 12-week project, are you going to meet on a monthly basis with your project sponsor? Are you going to meet on a weekly basis? What about other stakeholders? Are you going to have a steering committee? All those sort of things are part of the communication. When we start talking about risk, what is the risk to the project in terms of what things might go wrong? What would be the consequence of those things happening? And what's the likelihood of it happening and the impact? And then you can start to RAG rate your risks and start to think about what would you put in place to reduce the risk of that happening, or to look at from a RAG point of view, how you get from a red or an amber into a green so that it's not a high risk. Do you need to think about eliminating some of the risk by doing something slightly differently? Or will you reduce it by perhaps thinking of an alternative way of delivering that particular part of the project? Or accept it and say that's going to be a risk, we will monitor that, and we might have a contingency plan in place should we need it. So that's all about risks, and a risk register is a part of the project management plan. As you go through the project, you might come across issues. These are things which you hadn't thought of, which pop up unforeseen. You know, it could be COVID might be something which was unforeseen 2 years ago, and now has become an issue where a project that was supposed to be delivered 2 years ago has now been delayed or has taken on extra costs, and therefore you need to record the issues that have taken place. It may be that you need to involve the project sponsor, because the project sponsor at a senior level might have approved a budget for this particular project, but because of certain issues, you've overrun that budget and you need to then implement some changes. either bring in new resource or look at extending the project, but you need to get the approval from the project sponsor to revisit the project management plan and make amendments because of issues that have happened. And so here's an issues log where you identify what happened, who reported it, what was the outcome, and was it resolved? That's a good way of collecting information where a project doesn't always run to plan, and you can identify why it didn't happen. So that the next time you do a project, you might think, well, this issue we didn't think about, but it's for the next project, we need to build that into the risk register, because that might be a problem that's going to arise that we need to think about. And as you go through the project, therefore, it's important to embed certain milestones by which you're going to review it. It could be as you're going along, just as a schedule of meetings that you would take place. It could be that at the end of each individual stage, or you might have some particular points by which you can review and evaluate it, look at the project management plan and just make sure that you're on schedule for what you're trying to achieve. Or you could be doing reviewing the project at the end of the particular stages just to demonstrate how you're getting on. Some particular projects will not allow you to go to the next particular gateway unless you've completed the particular work package and it's been evaluated and approved by the project sponsor. Then as we get towards closure, so this is all about finalizing the outcomes, tying everything up, producing the documentation to demonstrate the success of the project. It might be about looking at contract staffing. You might have employed people specifically to support you in this particular project, summarize the outcomes, and then start to produce a final report. All the documentation has to be archived, because as a project manager, you might move on to something else, and a few years down the line, you might want to revisit this project just to see how it was done if you did it again, but the staff aren't there, but the documentation is. And then evaluate the project in terms of, did you achieve what you set out to achieve? What are the lessons that you've learned in terms of running this particular project, and how would you recommend it? So looking at the project management life cycle, there are 5 different stages. The concept is really about looking at the rationale. What are you trying to achieve? What is the problem you're trying to solve? And think about some of these particular tools about SWOT analysis, PESTLE analysis, problem solving tools like 5 Whys, root cause analysis, or Ishikawa. Then put together with the project sponsor a project management plan, which involves all those things about roles and responsibilities, work breakdown, Gantt chart. So there's another way of looking at Gantt chart or a work breakdown structure, is something called a PERT evaluation document, looking at the flow of activities through a project, not just about blocking it out in a Gantt chart, but it's more of a flow diagram for project management. And then looking at budgets, communication, risk register. So you've got this blueprint that you're going to move forward. That's what's going to drive the project, and it's going to be a reference document for the project sponsor and the project manager to evaluate and then deliver it, all those sort of normal day-to-day operations for implementing a project. Then looking at the evaluation of it, documentation, archiving, and the outcomes and lessons learned. So that's the project management life cycle. It fits in with the knowledge and skills for the project management. There is an assignment to go with the knowledge part of the assignment, and then when you get to do project management skills, that is the endpoint assessment where you have a 12-week project you have to implement. So that's the session to do with project management.